Hey everyone, welcome to week 6 of the Collab Lab. Today we have some demos, we have a new learning module, and we're gonna go over new issues. So who is doing the demo?
I'm doing demo for our team for number 9.
Okay, wonderful.
And I
Let
believe
me
Sarah for
review the
number 10.
presenter.
Okay.
Take it away.
Okay. All right. So just to look at our issue, welcome. I'm Randall and Michelle. We worked together this week on number 9, which was as a user, we want to be alerted when I'm entering an empty item or an item that's already on the list. So we looked at in case they send an empty item. We also looked at case and commas and different things that could go wrong. For instance, if they were to submit apples with a capital P, and make sure they don't submit it twice or adding a comma. And their original input would be saved in the database. So if we take a look, we've got our list. We've got apples there, so I'll give that a try. We'll go to add item. And I'll try in uppercase. We've got a little message. Looks like apples on your list. I'll try with a little bit of a funky space and some commas. It looks like it's on your list. And if we go back, the original is there, nothing new is added. So it looks so far so good. And let me share what we're doing with our code. So we worked, I think, mostly with add item, right? I'm not sure we touched anything else. I think Michelle's going to talk about the first 3 things. And I can scroll for you. Oh, I should have connected us live. But do you want to talk about the first few things, Michelle?
Yeah, so first we
I'll start at the top.
online, I think at the beginning, at the top of add item function, we destructured data, and that prop is coming from app.jsx, which is basically our data from the database. And then on line 19, we have a regular expression, and that's basically sets a pattern of anything that isn't a letter or number. And that'll be useful in a moment when we scroll down to, I believe, line 50, I think it was 56 or 58. Yes, so 58, we have const name matches array. So in this code block, we are taking the data that we destructured earlier, and we're using the sum method. And this method finds at least one item in our array in the database that passes the test that we provide in the return statement. So first, we are checking if an item actually exists in the list with item.name, as well as if that item does exist, we are checking if it matches the item that the user submits. So we're using methods like toLowercase, replace all, to account for like letter casing, and we are in the replace all, we are passing the regular expression, which is the pattern we created earlier, and replacing it with an empty string. So essentially, we are eliminating all of the extra spaces, all of the non-letters, non-digit characters, turning all of the uppercases to lowercases in order to compare 2 strings at their most basic. So this whole function will return true if it finds a match in the database. I will go ahead and pass to Randall to talk about the 2 if statements following that.
Thank you. And so we'll just scroll a bit down and we see at line 68, or here's a comment. The user is notified if the input matches an item in the database. The item does not get added and it exits the function. So we have our if name matches array. We have our little hot toast message, notify it's in the list based on the item name. So if it does match, we let them know, hey, this is already there. I'll scroll up so you can kind of see that. Where is it? Right here. So again, kind of check the same thing, checking the item name to lowercase and replacing it and all the regex. Looks like item name is already in your list. So thanks, Matt, for the tip on that. Ashel added that last night. And then our second if statement. So again, so here we're looking, the user is notified of if the input after the spaces are trimmed is the length of 0, right? So we had to get rid of the possibility of them hitting the space bar and submitting. So trimming all of that, make sure the length is 0. If that's the case, they cannot enter a blank space. Another hot toast message comes out and it would exit, so we don't add it. And that one says, no blanks may be submitted. Okay. And in terms of learning, I think we experimented with a lot of things new to me, but as I checked in my bootcamp video, I should learn it. The sum method was great because that helped us out. We got some tips from mentors there. What else were we playing with? We were playing with the database, learning how to communicate with Firebase, and figuring out how to get that item name, which I think gave us a little trouble earlier. And then accounting for things like in the comments and the pull requests, like, oh, you can enter a blank space. Like an empty input was fine, but if they hit spacebar a few times, they could still input. So we learned on how to account for that with trim and the lowercase and all that. Shell, what else? Because you were figuring out a lot of the logic for the stuff you mentioned.
I think you pretty much covered most of it, Randall. I think an interesting thing that we kind of learned a little bit more was regex, regular expressions, which is like a whole different, it can get a little confusing, but in the PR, Alex kindly pointed out that there were tools to kind of help us developers so that we don't have to memorize them. So yeah, we learned more about regex.
Yeah, lots of looking at documentation this week. Yeah, I think that's it. Any questions?
Awesome job, y'all. I have a question. The case where there's no list token, is that something that y'all just added in, or was that a possibility?
No list token. I don't think we touched that this week, did we?
Well, I think that was like the last, like,
oh, okay.
If there's no list token, notify like, hey, you don't have a list token.
Oh,
I don't
yeah,
know.
I believe that was last issue, I think.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Yes.
You want me to put it back up?
No, that's okay.
Okay.
And I'm going to be sharing my screen for issue 10 if we're ready to move on to that.
Yeah, we're done.
I think I just need the permissions.
You should have it now. Take it
Thank
away.
you. Okay. So you can see the issue, right?
Yes.
Okay. So our issue was that when you check an item, that the next purchase date in Firestore updates. So we're gonna go through a demo first. Alex, do you want to lead this one?
Yeah, let's do it. The reason why I mentioned the list token is because it's on us, but we were working on the same list token at the same time, I believe. So some of our data got a bit jumbled, but it's okay. Most of it's good. And yeah, so our focus was to make sure that date next purchase gives us an accurate estimated interval for when the app thinks the user will buy its next item. And so we're just going to show the demo here first so that we have a visual of what's going on when we show you the calculations in the back end. But for example, we're going to click on grapes, which before we do, just to note that this value from Firebase is showing that this item was purchased on November 18, and it's been purchased 5 times since then. The last time it was purchased was the 4th, and it estimated the date next purchase to be the 18th, but the user instead, by clicking on the checkbox, will update its calculations and shorten the time in which it thinks the next purchase date will be. That being said, the next purchase date, we've done the calculations in the back end. The next purchase date for this should be the 22nd. Let me just confirm. Is that correct, Sarah? 22nd that we calculated?
That sounds right. It was 11 days from today.
Right. Yes. Okay. And so, yeah, we did some calculations on how our estimates work in the back end. So in theory, we should be able to calculate the next purchase date. So if we click on grapes, boom, 22nd is the next purchase date. So we're also going to show another edge case where, let's say the user has only purchased an item once. And in Brussels sprouts, that means that if an item is purchased less than 2 times, the estimated interval will just be the date since it was last purchased. So for example, the last time we purchased it, it was the 9th. And if we purchased it again today on the 11th, the next interval for the purchase date should be 4 days from now, which should be the 15th. So if we click on Brussels sprouts, you'll see the date next purchase should be the 15th. And we also had for apples prior to this meeting show an example where the interval was correctly estimated every 7 days. So unfortunately, we can't show that here. But I think we pointed out in our PR that if an item was purchased the same day that it was created, the date next purchased estimate will be the same day because that's what the calculation we're given from our Collab Lab import will show. But that being said, we're gonna head off into our code unless Sarah has anything else to add on our front end portion.
No, that's great. And then all of those numbers and calculations were not what we did this week, but it was what we had imported, but we will see that. Okay, so we started in dates.js and we added a function to be able to get the number of days between two dates. And so for any two dates that are put in, we will get back the number of days between them. So we exported this, and then also just flagging before we get into Firebase, we added this to the list items so that to find that 24-hour rule around items being checked, we put that in so that it was 1 day since items are checked instead using get days between dates because that felt shorter and easier. So in Firebase, we imported calculate estimate and we imported, let's see, get days between dates and 1 day in milliseconds from dates.js. And then if we go down to update item, last time we used update item, it was only updating, no, that's not it, down here. It was only updating the date last purchased and the total number of purchases. And so now when an item is clicked on and update doc is called, the date next purchased will update with get next purchase date, which we're going to walk through above. Okay, so a couple of changes we made. We are now also getting date next purchased from Firebase, and then we created this get next purchase date function to calculate that get next purchase date to figure out what date last purchased will be. So it all kind of revolves around this calculate estimate function that we imported that Alex is going to explain in a little bit. And the 3 arguments that we have to kind of define are previous estimate, days since last transaction, and total purchases. Total purchases is taken care of because that's just pulled directly from Firebase. And so this function defines previous estimate for us and days since last transaction. So first, we needed to clarify because sometimes the days between dates needs to be calculated from date last purchased, and sometimes it needs to be calculated from date created because not every item has been purchased yet. And so basically, if there is a date last purchased, then the last time that an item was updated will be date last purchased, otherwise it will be date created. So the previous estimate is the number of days between the date next purchased, which is automatically populated when you add an item, and date last updated, which again is either date last purchased or date created. So that's what this first piece is. And then days since last transaction is getting the number of days between a new date, so whatever the timestamp is for when the box is clicked, and the date last updated, again, date last purchased or date created. So I feel like this is confusing, but if you have any questions, you can stop me. The next purchase date is going to be creating a new timestamp out of getting the time of a new date, so like the current timestamp, and then running the calculate estimate function that we imported with those 3 arguments, and then multiplying it by 1 day in milliseconds. And then it returns next purchase date. Alex, do you want to talk a little more about calculate estimate?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. And no, you're doing a great job. I think like, yeah, I'll go into like what we learned about later, but in terms of calculate estimate, so this is pulled from the Collab Lab import. And as Sarah had said, really all of our calculations before or all of our variables that were created before next purchase date were created so that we can put it into the arguments for calculate estimate up until this point. So this estimate it has two cases where if a user has a certain amount of purchases, if a user has more than 2 purchases on an item, then the estimate runs its average based on how many purchases there were, the intervals and whatnot. However, if a user has purchased an item less than 2 times, it always defaults for the estimate to be the days since last transaction. Because as we think about it, if a user were to buy an item 1 time, the most accurate estimate of when that user will purchase it, in theory, will be the only variable we have for that interval. And that can be found, we've linked it in our PR, but I've shown it a few times in Slack, but that estimate can be found outside of our PR as well. But I know it can get a bit confusing. But in essence, thank you, Sarah. In essence, next purchase date is a JavaScript object that is converted into milliseconds so that we can submit it to as a Firebase timestamp in the backend.
And one other thing to add is the next purchase date will get more accurate with more transactions. And one thing we noticed is that when you add an item, you select whether you're going to purchase it in 7, 14, or 21 days. And that's what goes into the database. And so if there is a case where you add items and purchase them the same day, that causes some kind of glitchiness because of that calculate estimate, so that it's going to say that you're buying things like every day because you created it and bought it on the same day. But as you get into like a regular buying pattern, it will adjust to be more accurate, but it starts a little glitchy at the beginning.
Yeah. And I guess to add on top of that is that how we see it in the back end is the date next purchased based off of that estimate. If an item was created and bought the same day is 0 days, so the next estimated purchase date is that same day. But I believe in the user's view, when we do go into our next issues, like how that's perceived by the user is like a green, yellow, or red value, so that it's not as confusing to see, oh, it thinks that you're going to buy this item again today. It just thinks you're going to buy it the soonest because you bought it like within a day of creating it. So I think that's what the calculate estimates purpose was where it was coming from in that sense for that edge case. And yeah. Do you have anything to add, Sarah? I do just want to like talk a little bit about what we learned, especially for me who hasn't done timestamps yet, but go for it.
What we learned a lot.
Yes.
I think that something that continues to be something that's really important, I know for me to pay attention to, is the use of to date and get time, and when we're multiplying something by a day in milliseconds or dividing by a day in milliseconds. And I think the biggest lesson is that Firebase timestamps are not the same as regular timestamps. And so anytime you want to do anything in JavaScript using a Firebase timestamp, you always have to convert it to date. And I have forgotten that in some places. And then get time is basically converting, I think it's converting a JavaScript timestamp to milliseconds. Is that right, Alex? Maybe.
Yes. So I guess yeah, a JavaScript date object. Sorry, I don't know why that threw me off a little bit. Forget time. I don't know if the mentors can chime in on this too. I don't know why it threw me in for a loop there. I did write it in the PR though, but my short-term memory is pretty bad right now.
Oh, here. Yeah, get time returns the date in milliseconds. And then, yeah. So
yes, thank you.
there's a lot to do
Yeah.
with timestamps. I'll pass it back to you, Alex.
Thank you. Sorry I blanked out there for a second, but yeah, just to reiterate, we did learn a lot between the differences of like a Firebase timestamp and a JavaScript date object. And it was really like interesting to see like that JavaScript date objects in milliseconds apparently are like milliseconds since the last Unix epoch in like 1970. So fun fact. And really like understanding how to manipulate timestamps between like a database server and the front end and convert and being able to manipulate it so that we get the right calculation for either days or milliseconds was like really important. But this version of our code, it's actually been through a couple of changes. Some of you may have seen like the first time we came up with a solution, it wasn't as organized or refactored. So it was a lot of fun, like realizing, oh, there's a lot of similar functions that were happening, and we can definitely consolidate. And that's why date last updated on line 100 was there, because we ended up having prior two different ternaries for two variables, previous estimate and date since last transaction. And also shout out to Matt, who taught or showed us another way to import our timestamps, and rather than having them listed in more than once, we could have just put them all in one line. And I know DJ also offered us some great advice on like, just make get next purchase date a function. Like you can make it a function, import those days in milliseconds. And also Vol has like detailed observation of like where we missed the 2 date methods in some of our calculations, as well as like really helping us do a deeper dive on why when an item is purchased and created on the same day, why it's the same next date predictions. So thank you everyone for helping us get to where we are. Me and Sarah had a lot of fun with this. It was challenging, but like very rewarding at the same time.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you for an
Bravo.
excellent presentation.
Yeah.
All right. I think next on our agenda is a learning module by Matt. Matt, I'll making you a presenter. Let me know if you can share your
Okay.
screen.
I am going to leave my video turned off because I think that my internet is not that great. So we'll see how it does. Trying to share screen. I think it's going to let me. Okay. All right. I hope y'all can see it now.
Yep, looks good.
Awesome. All right. So today's learning module is about accessibility. So for some background, at least on my exposure to it, the team that I'm on where I work is focused on accessibility. And so I've actually, when I started working there, it's been almost a year now. I started on March 1st of 2022, and I had some exposure to accessibility prior to that, but I've definitely been a lot more exposed to it with this job. So one of the things that we've got here on this first slide is that a lot of times you'll see accessibility kind of abbreviated to A11Y. And I'm sure there's a name for these types of abbreviations, but other ones that you'll see are like I18N for internationalization, I think L10N for localization, etc. I want to say there's like a venture capital firm that's A16Z. And I want to say it's like maybe they're two founders' names that are put together or something like that. But anyway, there's 11 characters between A and Y, so it's A11Y. So if you see it abbreviated, that's why. And so we'll see if we can talk about more about what it is. So as you see listed there on the practice the what is accessibility, it comes down to being inclusive in the things that we build. So making sure that everyone, or the largest group of people possible, can use the applications that we build. So that's what it's all about. So you can see listed here people with physical disabilities, situational disabilities, and socioeconomic restrictions on bandwidth and speed. And the ideal scenario is that everybody has equal access to information and also functionality. And information is a lot easier to make accessible, at least with respect to web application development. But when it's time to talk about functionality, that's when it really gets interesting. So anyway, the Worldwide Web Consortium, W3C, maintains a working group dedicated to this topic, and they publish related standards. And then sometimes you'll hear something called Section 508, and that requires government agencies to make websites that are accessible to people with disabilities. But I can tell you that if you work for a company that does business with government, you will be also subjected to a lot of the same requirements as far as Section 508. So that's something to be aware of, and we'll talk about the why in a moment, and that'll kind of come back up. So another thing about what, you may have heard us refer to screen readers or other such assistive technologies. So you'll see here like screen magnifiers. So if a person has very low vision, it may be better for them to have sort of an automatic thing on their operating system that magnifies parts of the screen, so that they're only looking at a portion of the screen at any given time, but they can read it really well. There's things like speech input. I think a common one is called Dragon. It's the name of a software tool that you can give it voice commands, and then it will kind of execute things on your behalf in terms of like using websites and that sort of thing. We have assistive keyboards and also braille displays. There's other things that I've seen as far as modifying the way that screens are used, but definitely a good case here to be made. So popular screen readers, and there's more than one. You've got NVDA, which is I think a free and open source one, and I think when I looked over the previous versions of this presentation, it was brought up that was a really popular one, and it's free. It doesn't cost anything. JAWS is available on Windows. That's a paid product. And then VoiceOver is shipped with the Mac operating system. I want to say there's like maybe one more that is common, but these three are certainly a pretty high portion of the test cases that people will use. So let's talk about why. It's like I hit the left hand. I think I'm on the right thing now. Okay. So the why. So the biggest thing is it's the right thing to do. One of the things that really I found attractive about the job that I have now is that there was kind of an aspect of, call it benevolence, but it was a case of it's the right thing to do. So it's easy to draw a line between the work that I do and the level to which people with different disabilities or other situations that they're in are more able to use the software tools at hand. One thing is that you may be legally obligated to make your website accessible. And I think I've seen websites that talk specifically about prior legal cases and that sort of thing, where one of the earlier versions of this presentation brought up, I think it was Domino's Pizza, got into kind of a legal situation about whether or not their website was accessible. And I'm not going to go into any more detail about that. But another thing that you might not realize is how many people use assistive technologies. And so one of the things pointed out here is that more people in the US use assistive technologies than people that live in Canada. And some estimates go as high as 20% of website visitors have some sort of disability. So in general, like, again, it's making pages more accessible for people with disabilities and people of any sort of spread and spectrum. All right, so this is another topic of what sorts of disabilities might be at hand. So you have permanent, temporary, and situational. So, the example here is like, maybe it's a war vet that has an amputation, or an amputated arm, and so they have one arm available to them. Or maybe, you got in a car accident, or you had an injury and you've only got one arm kind of available to you because you've got this temporary disability. And then another case is you're a new parent, you got your baby in your arm, so you can't use more than one. So that's just, the ability to sort of use your arm. And you talk about seeing and blindness and that sort of thing. The director that he's now moved to a different company, but where I work now, the director that was there when I was first hired, he was blind, but he wasn't blind his whole life. I can't remember honestly if it was something that happened to him, like an injury, or if it was actually like a degenerative disease or whatever it was. But in any case, when it comes to vision, you've got cases of blindness where somebody's legally blind, they have very, very low vision, or totally blind where there's no vision at all. But then you have other cases like cataracts and other just, forms of myopia or whatever. And then you have this interesting situational distracted driver can't see what's in front of them because they're doing whatever they're doing. Hearing, so if you talk about putting video captions on videos, it's a case of whether people can hear that makes that important. And then you have some of the speaking aspects, so nonverbal individuals, heavy accents, that sort of thing. If you've ever, and this could be like a case of situational, like, okay, you're on a Zoom call and your audio stops working and now you can't contribute to the conversation, and suddenly you jump onto the chat messages and now you've got a means of actually contributing. I actually I could count on more than one hand how many times that I've been in that situation. So anyway, those are examples. And the more you think about that, the more it'll sort of make sense why you're building applications the way that you do. All right, so let's talk about how you make things more accessible. So use valid semantic HTML. That's the first one that's listed. And I don't know how many of y'all have seen things that talk about semantic HTML, but essentially it's using HTML tags that are meant for the purpose for which you're using them. So things like using a table tag to hold tabular data is one example of using semantic HTML. There are definitely many, many, many more cases, but that's just one specific example instead of like a collection of divs and that sort of thing. Another thing that gets brought up a lot is always including alternate text with your image tags. There are some caveats that come with this. So one of the things that gets brought up in sort of the previous versions of this presentation is like, say, for example, you have a hero image is what it would be called, where it's like the most attractive image at the very top of your website. And it's meant to draw attention visually, but it doesn't necessarily contribute to the context with which the person would consume your website. Like, maybe the website is selling musical instruments and the hero image is like just I don't know, different colors, making a rainbow in the background or something like that. Like, it doesn't necessarily add to the context of it. And so there are some cases where you don't really need to, and in some cases it's actually better not to. But in general, try to include alternate text attributes to your image tags. Use ARIA attributes. So I'll talk about this in a moment, but I think it's like authoring rich internet applications is what ARIA stands for. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in detail, but the key being only use it if you have to. Ensure all content is reachable via keyboard. So that's something that is pretty straightforward to check on. But if you're having to ask yourself, can a non-sighted user use this? One of the key questions is, can I use this application without a mouse? Because a mouse is not going to help a non-sighted user. So can I get to everything I need to get to, and can I use it to input data or input whatever I need to input only with a keyboard, and that's it. So that's kind of the practice of just making sure that everything is accessible via keyboard. Content and tab ordering. So, the way that you move around within a website is hitting the tab key. And so can I get to everything I need to get to? And also, does the order make sense? Or, one of the examples that shows up in one of the previous versions of this presentation is that you had to hit the tab key 55 times on the website before you got to like the chat with us feature. And it may have actually made better sense to put that at the front. Another one is use sufficient color contrast. So this comes down to just visually impaired users, like where they have vision, but maybe there's a color blindness issue, or maybe there's some other issue where they just can't see all that well. So color contrast is something that is very, very, very common, especially as you kind of style your pages differently to make sure that you have enough color contrast that somebody's going to be able to read it when they have some kind of visual impairment. And then another thing is, don't use only color to signify state. So I think one of y'all had alluded to in one of our next issues, like red means something on maybe the checkbox or whatever it was. And so how do you convey that context but not using the color? So that's the sort of thing that comes up there. All right, so then best ARIA is no area at all. We need to use semantic HTML whenever possible. And so the point that they're making there is that ARIA attributes are ways of sort of changing things about your really, really dynamic applications so that they behave more like semantic elements, but they're richer. Like that's the point, is that they're authoring rich internet applications. So maybe like, for example, you're making something where people add tags to a post that they're putting on a blog. And instead of using like a select box and a button where they just keep adding the tag again and again and again, or they type it into a text box and hit the button, you've got some custom thing where they can like type, and all of a sudden when they stop typing, it'll make the tag and blank out the text box and all that stuff. So when you have really, really dynamic things like that, it makes sense to have ARIA attributes. But if you're not doing something specific like that, then ARIA attributes aren't necessarily the way to go. So let's talk about how we would, tools and steps that we would take in taking care of accessibility issues or trying to make the most of accessibility issues. So we have automated tools like Axe. And the point that they make is that it's a good start, but it only finds 30% of the issues. And so this is something that it sort of scans the web page, looks at the state of the web page, and compares it to different accessibility guidelines at that snapshot and sort of moment in time, and tells you what you should fix. So like the alt attribute for images, do you have them everywhere that you're supposed to? Did you not put a title on like a video thumbnail or something like that? So the point that they're making though is it only finds 30% in that it's a snapshot in time. So when you're using the application and you make a change state to something else, do all the transitions throw somebody's focus in a different spot on the page and the user has no idea what happened because they can't see? Or there's some like weird case that's kind of like that, where you pull up like a modal dialogue, but now all of a sudden you don't know how to escape the dialogue and you can't get back to where you were. So that's an accessibility issue, and kind of a nasty one, but it's not as simple as, did the application have an accessible state at that moment in time or the moment before? So anyway, that's the point of it's static analysis. It's not necessarily can it be used. So this is called guided audits, and we'll actually be demonstrating this tool. I think I'm going to try to in a moment. So Accessibility Insights, it's available as a Chrome extension. And then you also have the point that's made for audits by accessibility testers, like, people that use screen readers on a regular basis, whether because they have visual impairments or because they just know how to use them. And this company, Fable Tech Labs, can do that. And I'm sure there's other companies that you can work with. The team that I'm on at work, we have a group of testers that's what they do for the products that we build and sell, is go through those manual audits and make sure that the different applications are accessible, and if they're not accessible, we document how they're not accessible, and whether they're on the roadmap to fix or whatever the case may be, if there's any workarounds, that sort of thing. So I'm going to try, let's see, I think it's demonstration time. So let me move things around so I can actually show this stuff on the screen. Apparently I deleted tabs and I shouldn't have done that. So maybe I can find, yeah, okay. So we can maybe do like the Firebase, just the page that talks about Firebase in general. So we've probably found ourselves on this website before. My Zoom thing is blocking. Okay, I can find it now. All right. So now that I have this page pulled up, I'm going to try to use Accessibility Insights for web, and there's multiple aspects to this tool, but one of them is called FastPass. And this is just sort of a spotting scan of what's on the page here. And so it's going to open up a new window and it's going to show me the results of scanning the page. And so these are cases like where it found 15 things that I should probably fix. And so, for example, a frame title, there's an iframe on the page, but we don't really know what it's for, where it goes, etc. And I don't know what it's used for. Maybe it's for like pasting text into or something like that, but it needs to have some sort of title. And that's what this thing is pointing out. Color contrast, so I mentioned like this is a super common one. So we're looking for a contrast ratio of 4.5 to 1. And if you like math and color, then that's definitely something to look into. But this particular piece of text, or I guess it's a link that's like a YouTube card button, has a color contrast of 3.67. And we're looking for like a 4.5 to 1. If you make the text bigger in some cases, then you have a different color contrast ratio that you're looking for. If I remember right, if you scroll through, it will highlight. I remembered it highlighted the things that it found that were wrong. Yeah, okay. So it's sort of saying like, hey, this link doesn't have enough contrast in it. This blue on the white background doesn't have quite enough color contrast to be something that somebody can see. And if I remember right, like black on white or white on black, the color contrast is like 21. So that's the biggest number. So that gives you some sense of, whether it's okay. But it is interesting that this text, like this kind of light gray color or lightish gray color, has a better contrast ratio than this blue and white. So like I said, if you like color and math, that's an interesting topic. So let's switch back to here. All right, so a few things that are available as intros here. I'll probably just make sure that we get this shared so that y'all can refer to it, but we have the WAI intro to accessibility. We've got WCAG 2.0. So if you ever work at a company that you're required to remediate accessibility, things like that, WCAG or Web Content Accessibility Guidelines version 2 point something they're sort of a different level of standards that have kind of a graduating scale. And that's what a lot of these like automated tools are kind of comparing things against. And when you're meeting compliance or whatever for work, oftentimes you're targeting a specific level of compliance as defined by that guidelines. So then we have a few other things here: assistive technology and somebody demoing a screen reader. That's actually pretty fun to watch, or fascinating to watch, I should say. If you're a sighted person, you've never observed a non-sighted person use a website, it can be eye-opening. So an example that, back when we were doing some stuff, I'm gonna cut this short in a minute, but Randall, you and I were talking about like the radio buttons on the app a long time ago. And I saw a case where one of my coworkers was showcasing, all right, here's how I use this job application website with a screen reader. And he was going through all the questions and filling out the form. And he got to a case where it was 2 radio buttons, and he knew that one said yes and one said no, but he had no idea what the question was. It just was not in the context of the form that he was filling out. And actually what the question said was, have you ever been convicted of a felony? And he said, I don't know what this question is. I'm just going to put yes. And he just keeps going down the list of different form elements and stuff like that. So again, if you've never observed somebody using a screen reader, it can be quite revealing. All right, so there's a couple of other links here that are definitely going to be of interest, but I think with that, I can probably wrap this one up. So I'm sure there's Q&A that'll come up, and it's a lot to take in and to learn about, but I hope this has been helpful and informative. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing.
Thanks, Matt. Man, I learned a lot.
Awesome.
I have a question though, real quick. Do you have like a preferred tool? Like I've heard like Lighthouse is pretty common, but I don't know if you have one that you use regularly that you really like.
Well, there's one that I'm biased to because I help make it. So I'll see if I can find the link to it. But,
yeah, sure. That'd be awesome.
Yeah. Let's see if I can find it. This one is based on Axe, DevTools, Chrome extensions, and that sort of thing. Like it, I'll just paste the link. This one is probably like a lot less featureful than the Accessibility Insights one, but this is meant to be more of like a one-click. I just want to run a scan off the bat and see how this thing behaves. I'll warn you, if you try to run the scan on the Chrome extension listing, it won't work. Apparently, those are websites that kind of block that sort of thing. But there are certain pages that Chrome will not run extensions on. But in any case, that's the one that my team develops. And it's similar to Accessibility Insights or Axe DevTools, and there's 2 or 3 other ones that are pretty common to be used. And a lot of companies kind of make their own flavors of this sort of thing, but there's tons and tons of different tools out there. And if you're ever interested, this kind of got brought up in the last or older versions of this presentation, but if you're ever interested in making PRs to open source projects, it's pretty straightforward to pull up the deployed version of that project or even the local version, run a tool like this on it, and it's easy to back things up. Like a lot of times these tools have the context. They'll tell you, all the different background information about the violation that it's pointing out. And it often also tells you like how to fix it. So you can put together a pull request that, helps them mitigate this thing. A few weeks ago, I actually made a pull request on the Collab Lab website. I think it was their video, like Tech Talks page, had something where the links for YouTube didn't have a title on the link, or like the YouTube embed, I think is what it is. And then there was another color contrast thing or something like that. But like 2-line change. But hey, I got to contribute to the project, so it's cool.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, Matt, for a really good demo and for bringing up all of the questions with accessibility. And I see we are kind of short on time, so let's move on to the issues for this week. Okay, wonderful. So the pairing for this week is Alex and Ashel and Randall and Sarah. And we are moving on to our issues number 11 and 12. So we are getting close to the final line. So one of the issues, number 11, is as a user, I want to be able to delete items from the shopping list. So there should be a button that allows the user to delete the items that the user no longer needs or that were added there by mistake. For the sake of time, I'll give you a few minutes just to scroll through the acceptance criteria. It's pretty straightforward. So essentially, you just want to add a functionality to delete some of the items. And for the issue 2, it's issue number 12. And so essentially, you want to give the users the functionality to list the items in the order of how soon the user would need them. So you know how we have these parameters for how often, how soon you will need the item, and you have this soon, kind of soon, and not so soon. So you probably want to display your items in an order of this parameter of this time. And there is also an acceptance criteria describing a little bit more on how to do that. So as usual, you will go to meet the acceptance criteria first, and then you'll move to the stretch goal. I believe this issue would be a little bit more time consuming than issue number 11. So if any pairs have a preference over one or another, please let me know.
I would love to do 11, but open to others' thoughts as well.
I was going to ask if you wanted to break from all that, Sarah.
Yes.
What, Sarah, you giving up on timestamps?
Yes. I just want to share and make sure everyone gets a chance.
I can carry the torch.
I need the practice, but I think you deserve the break.
All right, wonderful. Then it is decided. As usual, I will post the threads on our Slack channel. And if you have any questions, if something is unclear, please reach out. We will be happy to clarify it for you. I know this was a little bit rushed, but we are kind of short on time, and I want to be respectful of your time as well. Are there any questions?
No, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Matt. I really appreciated that too.
Oh, can I mention something really quick? I think it was DJ who recommended in office hours that it might be a good idea to have a preliminary PR just to get the ball rolling on what we'd like for styling as a team. If that sounds good for everyone, I don't know who'd like to make that, or I can just make a quick one for us, and then we can go from there and see what we all agree on for styling.
Cool.
Love the idea. Also, if you look through the issue for the styling, there you may find some suggestions on how to best approach it. All right, fantastic.
Cool.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend.
You too. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Have a good one.
All right.